The craziest neighborhood war I have ever been part of started because my kids drew a rainbow hopscotch game on the sidewalk with washable chalk, and somehow one angry HOA Karen acted like they had vandalized a national monument. But what happened? Next completely flipped the entire neighborhood against her because instead of backing down, I hired one of the best 3D pavement artists in the state and turned our boring sidewalk into the biggest attraction our community had ever seen. My name is Jake Turner, and I live in one of those suburban HOA neighborhoods where everything looks almost too perfect. Clean lawns, matching mailboxes, identical fences, and neighbors who somehow know everybody's business before breakfast. Most people around. Here we're normal, then there was Cynthia. Before this story gets even crazier, make sure to like and subscribe to Karen Stories Daily because stories like this prove some people completely lose their minds over the smallest things imaginable. Cynthia was the kind of HOA resident who treated every tiny inconvenience like a personal attack against civilization itself. Kids laughing too loudly. Complaint basketball hoop visible from the street complaint. Someone parked slightly crooked complaint honestly. People avoided her whenever possible because one conversation with her could ruin your entire afternoon. My wife and I mostly stayed out of neighborhood drama because we had 2 young kids and enough stress already. Our son Mason was 8 and our daughter Lily was 6, and during summer they loved spending afternoons outside drawing on the sidewalk with chalk. Nothing offensive, nothing messy, just colorful drawings, games, flowers, cartoon animals, and giant smiley faces all over the pavement in front of our house. The chalk always washed away after rain. Nobody cared, at least nobody except Cynthia. The first complaint came on a Tuesday afternoon while my kids were drawing a giant rocket ship near the driveway. Cynthia marched across the street, holding her phone already recording before she even reached us. She immediately started talking about community appearance standards and how public sidewalks should not look cluttered with childish graffiti. Childish graffiti, she was talking about washable sidewalk chalk made for kids. I explained calmly that the chalk was temporary, harmless, and literally designed for outdoor play. But Cynthia crossed her arms and said, "Temporary damage is still damage." My son looked genuinely confused and quietly asked if he was in trouble. That instantly irritated me because now some power-obsessed neighbor was making little kids feel bad for drawing outside during summer. I told Cynthia respectfully the kids were doing nothing wrong, and she eventually stormed off muttering about filing complaints with the HOA. Honestly, I expected that to be the end of it. It was not. 2 days later, we received an official HOA warning letter claiming excessive sidewalk markings negatively affected neighborhood presentation. I actually laughed reading it because it sounded ridiculous. Then another notice arrived threatening fines if the drawings continued. That was when frustration started turning into annoyance, because instead of addressing actual neighborhood issues, the HOA was targeting children drawing with washable chalk. Still, I tried being reasonable. I emailed the HOA board, asking if there was seriously a rule banning harmless chalk art. The response basically said sidewalks must remain visually consistent with community standards. That sentence alone told me exactly what kind of people were making these decisions. Meanwhile, my kids stopped drawing outside because they thought they were causing trouble. That honestly bothered me more than the HOA notices themselves. One evening, Mason asked why adults hated fun, and I swear that question stayed in my head all night. The next weekend, Cynthia escalated things again. My kids had quietly started drawing small pictures near the curb while playing with neighbors. And suddenly Cynthia walked outside, carrying a garden hose. Without saying a word, she sprayed water directly across all the drawings while the kids watched. The entire sidewalk turned into muddy streaks within seconds. Lily actually started crying. Could not believe a grown woman was standing there proudly destroying children's artwork like she had just defended national security. I walked over immediately and asked what she thought she was doing. She responded by saying someone needed to maintain standards around here. Several neighbors were already outside watching because the whole scene looked insane. One neighbor actually told Cynthia she was acting ridiculous, but she ignored him completely. Instead, she warned everyone that next time she would contact the HOA for stronger enforcement action. That was the moment I stopped trying to compromise, because once you intentionally upset kids over sidewalk chalk, you deserve a lesson in perspective that night while scrolling online. I remembered seeing videos of professional 3D pavement artists creating massive optical illusion street art pieces that looked incredibly realistic. And suddenly I had an idea. If Cynthia hated simple chalk drawings, then she was absolutely going to lose her mind over what came next. A few phone calls later, I connected with a professional pavement artist named Alex Moreno who specialized in giant temporary 3D sidewalk art installations for festivals and public events. The guy was insanely talented. When I explained the situation, he actually laughed and said, "Please tell me you are serious because this might be the funniest commission request I have ever heard." We planned everything carefully. The artwork would be completely family-friendly, fully washable, and created entirely within legal public sidewalk guidelines. No rules broken, no property damage, just art, a lot of art. The following Saturday, Alex arrived early in the morning with boxes of chalk supplies, measuring tools, and design sketches. First, neighbors thought maybe he was doing a small mural. They had no idea what was coming. Within 2 hours, people started slowing their cars near our street because the sidewalk looked like it had opened into a giant underground canyon with floating bridges, waterfalls, and glowing crystal caves. The illusion looked unbelievably real. Kids gathered around instantly. Parents started taking pictures. Even people from nearby streets walked over to see it. By lunchtime, our quiet little neighborhood suddenly looked like a community festival, and standing across the street staring in absolute disbelief was Cynthia. I will never forget her expression. She looked like someone had personally declared war on her front yard. She stormed over demanding to know who authorized the artwork. I calmly explained it was temporary washable chalk art created entirely within HOA guidelines because technically there was no rule banning art itself, only excessive markings. And this definitely was not excessive markings. This was professional art. That answer made her even angrier. She immediately started threatening emergency HOA action while dozens of neighbors stood around taking photos with the artwork. The funniest part was that families who barely spoke to each other before suddenly started hanging out together because of the sidewalk. Display kids laughed, people shared drinks, neighbors introduced themselves, and for once the street actually felt like a community instead of a competition for perfect lawns. Meanwhile, Cynthia looked absolutely furious watching everyone enjoy themselves. Then things got even better. Someone posted pictures of the artwork online, and by evening, local community pages started sharing it everywhere. People called it the coolest neighborhood sidewalk art they had ever seen. Cars slowly drove through the area just to look at it. One local news photographer even stopped by asking who created it. At that point, Cynthia completely lost control. The next morning, she called an emergency HOA meeting, demanding immediate removal of what she described as disruptive visual chaos. She was talking about happy kids and colorful chalk art. I attended the meeting expecting arguments, but honestly, I was not prepared for what happened next because the second Cynthia started complaining, several neighbors interrupted her immediately. One father stood up and said the artwork brought more positivity to the neighborhood in one weekend than the HOA had managed in years. Another resident pointed out that property damage complaints made no sense because the art was temporary and harmless. Then an older woman who rarely spoke during meetings quietly said maybe the community needed more joy and less control. That line hit the room hard because deep down most people already knew Cynthia had gone way too far over something completely harmless, and judging by the expressions around the room, even some HOA board members were finally starting to realize it too. By the end of the meeting, the HOA officially dropped every complaint connected to the sidewalk chalk, and new community guidelines actually encouraged family-friendly outdoor activities instead of restricting them. Cynthia looked furious watching the entire room support the same kids she tried silencing for weeks. The funniest part was that the 3D chalk artwork stayed popular for days, and neighbors kept bringing their families to take pictures before the rain finally washed it away. After that, nobody complained about sidewalk chalk again because the whole neighborhood realized happy kids drawing outside was never the real problem. If you enjoyed this story from Karen Stories Daily, then like, subscribe, and comment below if you think some people forget communities are supposed to feel alive, not controlled.